and the Israel nation took over from the original to carry out the Abrahamic prophecy, but Israel's task is to bring about world peace through warfare. Hence what has been going on ever since October 7, 2023. The easy way was rejected, so now it is the hard way. The world will get so disgusted with warfare, death, destruction, lies, hypocrisy, etc., and will sue for peace, which is the intention of the so-called Abrahamic prophecy, a blessing of a more civilized world. So when you see Netanyahu whispering in the ear of the President of the United States, yes, that's what Israel is supposed to do. The US is pivotal in bringing about a new world order of peace, but in doing so it has to be brought down a peg or two. Hence the supposed erratic behavior of President Trump. He is not making the United States look good in the eyes of the international community, but that is the point.
Black History Decoded.
Despite Abraham being a foundational figure for 3 billion people, there is zero archaeological evidence for his existence. We have thousands of ancient texts, king lists, and even mundane trade receipts from 4,000 years ago, yet Abraham's name appears in none of them. The biblical Abraham is not who you think. I will tell you who he really is. When I was growing up, I was led to believe that white or light-skinned people did everything in history and that black or African people were just slaves or did barbarism in Africa. Western Christian nations spread malicious propaganda and lies about black and African history to their people and the entire world when they knew better. That is pathetic, but they have a lot to hide.
Everything Western nations told us about history has to be reassessed.
I can gather a whole bunch of white people in America and Europe that independently study history, and they will tell you that there is something wrong with their history and the biblical narratives.
3 of the world's major religions trace back to one man, who the Bible says was named Abraham. However, skeptics allege there is not enough evidence to suggest this man ever existed.
So before the time of the Israelite kings, none of biblical history can be verified, and nowadays it's basically dismissed as myth.
Some have questioned the existence of Moses. There are no sources other than the Bible which mention Moses, and the Bible's descriptions of him as a figure are seen to be contradictory. For instance, his long lifespan, living 120 years, may have simply been impractical.
They are not even concerned about the misinformation of black and African history. They know that their own history has been manipulated and they wonder why. The Bible is based off of history, but the stories have been manipulated drastically. For example, the Adam and Eve story is based off of 2 famous historical events in Kemet. The creation story, which is not well known to most, but the information is there, I will discuss in a future video. The other is a famous forbidden love affair. The scribes or scholars twisted those stories to make the Bible seem much more interesting. The parting of the Red Sea, the people walking on dry land, the world being flooded, and Noah and his family repopulating the earth, etc. Very interesting, right, and unrealistic, but based on historical events. The scribes or scholars were very creative with their storytelling. So creative, in fact, that they manipulated the timeline. The story about Adam and Eve and the Noah story, you can only conclude that this must have happened long time ago, but it really didn't. Now, Abraham, not his actual name of course. The story of Abraham is a foundational narrative in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It marks a shift from a world of many gods to a specific covenant between one God and a chosen family. God promised to make Abraham a great nation, to bless those who blessed him, and to give his descendants the land of Canaan. The core promise, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, you see how some people quote this concerning Israel. Well, they are the backup because the original chosen people failed due to the rejection by the Christians and fake Muslims. The Christians are not fake because their brutality and hypocrisy throughout history was the norm. The original chosen people were supposed to bring about world peace through somewhat peaceful means. I say somewhat peaceful means because sometimes you have to twist people's arms in order for them to do the right thing. For example, when the Moors invaded Spain, did they elevate the culture? Yes, the Moors significantly elevated the culture of the region during their rule. The period, known as Al-Andalus, is widely regarded by historians as a golden age of intellectual, artistic, scientific, and cultural achievement. Did Europeans and Arabs elevate the culture of Africans in the same way? No. The historical contexts, methods of interaction, and outcomes differ profoundly. European powers carved up Africa in the late 19th century, ruling through direct colonial administration until decolonization in the mid-20th century. The Moorish era stands out as a rare case where a conquering group brought sustained, broad-based advancements that outshone the prior society in many measurable ways. Neither Arab expansions nor European colonialism in Africa produced a comparable elevation. Both involved heavy exploitation, demographic harm, and cultural disruption, even if some tools or ideas were introduced. The contexts were fundamentally different. Al-Andalus benefited from a more advanced incoming civilization in a period of European relative decline, whereas Africa faced outsiders who prioritized extraction over mutual flourishing. That is what there and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So that was the point of the so-called Abrahamic prophecy, a better world through the chosen people, but they were rejected and persecuted ever since. The Jews that we know today took up the mantle. Remember the Jacob and Esau story, 2 nations? You can't think of them as individuals. You have to think of them as nations. The Esau nation were the chosen people and the Israel nation took over from the original to carry out the Abrahamic prophecy, but Israel's task is to bring about world peace through warfare. Hence what has been going on ever since October 7th, 2023. The easy way was rejected, so now it is the hard way. The world will get so disgusted with warfare, death, destruction, lies, hypocrisy, etc., and will sue for peace, which is the intention of the so-called Abrahamic prophecy. A blessing of a more civilized world. So when you see Netanyahu whispering in the ear of the President of the United States, yes, that's what Israel is supposed to do. The US is pivotal in bringing about a new world order of peace, but in doing so it has to be brought down a peg or two. Hence the supposed erratic behavior of President Trump. He is not making the United States look good in the eyes of the international community, but that is the point. The United Nations has to be reorganized into a powerful international body where it can control rogue nations attacking other nation, enforce international law, etc. The United Nations has to be reorganized into a powerful international body where it can control rogue nations attacking other nation, enforce international law, etc. Now, I am going to talk about the famous West African so-called prophecy which led to the creation of the Mali Empire. That is historical, but the Abraham story in the Bible is difficult to find outside the Bible, making it dubious, but I will show you the similarities. Remember, everything in the Bible is based off of historical events, but the writers, scholars manipulated details about those events. Also remember that a lot has been stolen from the Africans. That cannot be denied. The Arabs and the Europeans invaded, destabilized Africa over centuries, destroyed their artifacts, took their artifacts, destroyed their information, took their information, etc., and these very nations want to dictate what black or African history is, and when they do talk about African or black history, they have nothing good to say. So we are dealing with thieves that want to control the information about the Africans, all the while praising Jesus, Muhammad, God, and Allah. What a joke. I've noticed that all the major religions have a nasty attitude when black or Africans talk about their history. Because Western nations especially have massively manipulated history and will be exposed when black people and Africans truly connect the dots. After the New World Order, they won't be able to play their games anymore, and that is when we will confront them on their lies, globally. Now, the Abraham story is an African story. So manipulation of the timeline, location, and people was essential to hide this history. The story of Maghann Konaté, aka Biblical Abraham, also known as Maghann the Handsome, is a central part of the epic of Sundiata, the founding legend of the Mali Empire. Much like the story of Abraham, it is a tale of a specific prophecy that seemed impossible at the time but reshaped history. The mysterious hunter. Maghann Konaté was the king of the Mandinka people in modern-day Mali. One day, a divine hunter, a soothsayer, arrived at his court. He gave the king a strange and specific prophecy. The condition: the king must marry an ugly woman who would soon be brought to his kingdom. The promise: though she would be physically unattractive, she would bear him a son who would become the greatest king Mali had ever seen, the Lion King, the Buffalo Woman, Sogol Nkeju, aka Biblical Hagar. Note that Timbuktu, which is connected to the Mali Empire, has a famous well story, just like the Biblical Hagar story. Keep that in mind. Shortly after, 2 hunters arrived from the land of Du, bringing with them a woman named Sogol Nkeju. She was described as having a hunchback and monstrous eyes. The backstory: Sogolon was said to be the human double of a terrifying buffalo that had been ravaging the land. The hunters had defeated the buffalo and were told by an old woman to choose the ugliest maid as their reward. The marriage: remembering the prophecy, King Maghann married Sogolon, despite already having a beautiful first wife, Sesoruma Barit, and a son who was the heir apparent. The weak son. The prophecy didn't come true immediately in the way people expected. When Sogolon gave birth to Sundiata Keita, aka Biblical Ishmael, aka Biblical David,
the twang of a bow, and the glorious victory of Sundiata. The exiled Prince Sundiata arrays his forces against his enemy, the sorcerer king Soumaoro Kante. In the wake of the battle, Sundiata, only 18, was crowned Mansa, or emperor, of the 12-nation alliance that had marched with him. The nations were technically answerable to him, but he ran the Mali Empire more as a federation than as an absolute despot, with each tribe sending a chiefly representative to court. The sides meet. Spears flash and sorcerers chant incantations. Sundiata presses forward through the melee, moving toward Soumaoro. He knows that there's one chance. He must shoot an arrow tipped with a rooster's spur through the evil enchanter. His bow bends, the string twangs, and the arrow flies. Sundiata's victory is both very real and absolute. It is the beginning of the Mali Empire.
The epic of Sundiata begins with Sundiata's eventual father, King Maghann, of the now small kingdom of Mali. Maghann is known as the most handsome man in all the land, and is already married with a son. But one day a hunter and soothsayer appears at his court, and prophesies that if Maghann marries an ugly woman, he will father a great king.
the boy was a massive disappointment to the court, hence the potential sacrifice of the child, just like the biblical Abraham narrative. Sundiata was born crippled and could not walk. He spent his first 7 years crawling on the ground and was often mocked by the king's first wife. The king began to doubt the prophecy. How could a boy who couldn't even stand up rule a great empire? He considered sacrificing his child to save face, but decided against it. Before he died, he gave Sundiata a griot, an advisor, signaling that he still believed in the boy's destiny. The turning point came when Sundiata's mother was insulted by the first wife. Driven by a desire to defend his mother's honor, Sundiata used a heavy iron rod to pull himself up. The rod bent into a bow, but Sundiata stood upright and eventually tore a whole baobab tree out of the ground to bring to his mother. Did you know older baobabs often become naturally hollow? During the rainy season, water can collect in these hollow centers, creating natural wells. In arid regions, some communities have even carved out hollows in the trunks of living trees to use as storage reservoirs for rainwater. Now, let's hear the Ishmael story. Ishmael and the Well of Zamzam. In the Islamic narrative, Abraham is commanded to leave Hagar and the infant Ishmael in the barren desert of Mecca. When their water runs out, Hagar runs between the hills of Safa and Marwa 7 times, searching for help. According to tradition, the infant Ishmael, or the angel Gabriel, kicked or stomped his heel into the sand. The result, water miraculously bubbled up from the dry ground, creating the Well of Zamzam, which still flows today with the help of multiple water plants. Theme: survival and divine mercy. While Sundiata's act was one of proactive strength, Ishmael's was one of desperate necessity. The water was a sign that God had not abandoned the rejected branch of Abraham's family. In both cases, the well becomes the foundation of a city or an empire. Mecca grew around the Zamzam well, and the Mali Empire grew around the strength Sundiata found at the foot of that baobab, but the Timbuktu well story is far more realistic than the Islamic narrative. Check out my video on this. Timbuktu became a world power. It was a geological masterpiece of a location, whereas Mecca's story is about human survival against geological odds. The Mali well story is actually the origin of the name Timbuktu itself. While it doesn't involve stomping heels, it involves a very practical, strategic discovery that turned a seasonal camp into an empire. The empire, after years of exile and struggle, Sundiata aka Biblical David returned to defeat the sorcerer king Soumaoro Kante aka Biblical Goliath and founded the Mali Empire, exactly as the hunter had predicted to Maghann. Let's go over the Abrahamic promise again. The promise: God promised to make Abraham a great nation. The Mali Empire was a great nation that was hidden from the public for centuries. Why? For centuries, the Mali Empire was not mentioned in history by the major religions and their civilizations. We were taught to believe that blacks or Africans did nothing but slavery or barbarism in Africa. Well, they had a real reason to hide that history, didn't they? Abrahamic prophecy continued: to bless those who blessed him, and to give his descendants the land of Canaan. Canaan being the enormous lands of the Mali Empire. The core promise, Genesis 12 verses 1 to 3. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. When you look at the text of Genesis 12 through the lens of African history, several of my points align with historical and sociological realities. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. The Mali Empire was a great, well-known nation during its time and a blessing to other nations. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Even with the imperfections of Africans or black people, Africans had several successfully peaceful societies. Also the Moors, arguably described throughout history as black, uplifted Spanish societies, and blacks in America tried to civilize Americans through the civil rights movement. Africans and black people have a vested interest in making the world a better place because of their persecution throughout the centuries by so-called Abrahamic faith. Those that believe in God and the promise, the continuation of this persecution will cause God to curse the ones doing the persecution, and we know what the Arabs and Europeans did to the Africans of black people throughout the centuries. Julius Caesar's famous quotes, "It is the custom of the immortal gods to grant temporary prosperity and a fairly long period of impunity to those whom they plan to punish for their crimes, so that they may feel it all the more keenly as a result of the change in their fortunes. We all see it. The world is about to change." The great nation and peaceful societies. While history books often focus on European great nations, the Mali Empire, along with others like Aksum Great Zimbabwe and the Asante Empire, functioned exactly as the blessing describes. Economic blessing. Mali did not just hoard wealth. Through leaders like Mansa Musa, it stimulated the economies of the entire Mediterranean and Middle East. Social stability. Many pre-colonial African societies operated under sophisticated social contracts. For example, the Karukan Fuga, the constitution of the Mali Empire, established human rights, environmental protections, and rules for peaceful trade long before similar documents appeared in the West. The Moors and the uplifting of Europe. The Moorish influence on the Iberian Peninsula. Spain and Portugal is a textbook example of being a blessing to other nations, intellectual light. While much of Europe was in the Dark Ages, the Moors, many of whom were described by contemporaries as black or swarthy North and West Africans, brought advanced mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Infrastructure. They introduced paper, street lighting, and advanced irrigation to Spain. The ethical shift. They created a period of convivencia, coexistence, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived with a degree of peace that was rare for that era. The civil rights movement as a moral compass. I mentioned that black people in America have tried to civilize the nation. Historians often refer to the civil rights movement as the second Reconstruction or the moral heart of American democracy. Universal blessing. The techniques of nonviolence and the legal victories won by black Americans didn't just help black people. They expanded the rights of women, immigrants, and other marginalized groups globally. In this sense, all peoples on earth were blessed by that specific struggle. The part of the prophecy that says, "Whoever curses you I will curse," is a powerful framing for the consequences of the trans-Saharan and transatlantic slave trades. The moral argument. From a theological perspective, many argue that nations that built their wealth on the curse of enslavement eventually face a moral or systemic decline, a spiritual debt. The vested interest. Because African and black people have experienced the bottom of the global hierarchy, their leadership often prioritizes justice over power. This aligns with the meek inheriting the earth concept. Those who have suffered the most have the greatest incentive to build a world where suffering is minimized. If we view the Abrahamic blessing as a template for a people who are tested, persecuted, and then elevated to be a light to others, the African diaspora fits that pattern remarkably well. The persecution, the centuries of wilderness. The contribution, the scientific, musical, and moral blessing exported to the world. The promise, the eventual inheritance of a respected and central place in the global family. The long game of the Mali Empire or the civil rights movement suggests that even when the seed, the people, is being persecuted, the blessing, the contribution, continues to change the world. So why did Christians and Muslims, supposed believers of the Abrahamic prophecy, marginalize black people and Africans for over 1,000 years when Jesus and Muhammad would not condone such behavior? There is clearly a disconnect. Religious hypocrisy. Is it because they have something to hide? Absolutely. Despite the teachings of so-called Jesus and Muhammad, Christians and Muslims throughout history have distorted the long game of the Abrahamic prophecy to serve short-term power and greed, and most of our information about religion and history is coming from them. They have set mankind back at least 1,000 years with their grotesque manipulation of historical events. They must be challenged on their narratives. Even so-called Judaism is not exempt. 1. The Hamitic myth, a tool of distortion. To justify enslaving people while claiming to be God-fearing, both early medieval Muslims and later European Christians reinterpreted the Bible. The invention: they took the story of the curse of Ham, Genesis 9, and falsely claimed that Ham was the ancestor of black Africans. The lie: they argued that black people were divinely destined to be servants. The direct correction: there is no mention of race or skin color in the original Hebrew text of the curse. It was a purely political invention used by later empires to turn a universal blessing into an exclusive club. A people or nations that have to lie, cheat, and steal should not be trusted. Everything they say about religion and history has to be put into question. As we discussed, Timbuktu and the Mali Empire were incredibly wealthy in gold. Remember, the history of the Mali Empire was hidden from the world for centuries. Why? The hiding of the Mali Empire and the broader erasure of African history was not an accident. It was a sophisticated, multi-century geopolitical project. To justify the exploitation of a continent's resources and people, the winners of history had to delete the record of its achievements. If people knew that West Africa had a constitution, the Karuk and Fuga, while Europe was in the Middle Ages, or that Timbuktu was a global capital of science while the Americas were undiscovered, the moral justification for slavery would have collapsed. Thieves are not going to tell the truth. The pivot: for a long time, the Arab world and the African world were partners in trade. However, as the Trans-Saharan trade shifted, the demand for labor, slaves, grew. The betrayal. Hence, the nasty attitude towards black Muslims by light-skinned Muslims. Ignoring the Prophet, despite Muhammad's explicit statement in his final sermon. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a white has any superiority over a black. Later political leaders prioritized the gold over the God. They treated religion as a passport for power rather than a covenant for justice. When European Christians came to Africa, they used the Abrahamic blessing as a weapon. The logic: they claimed they were bringing the blessing, Christianity as civilization, to Africa. A lie, which is why they had to distort African history. The reality: they were actually destroying the practical wells, the African systems like the Karuk and Fuga, to extract resources. For 1,000 years, a great paradox has defined our world. The teachings of figures like Jesus and Muhammad, which speak of justice and compassion, were known but willfully ignored by those in power. Imagine the world we could have today if that hypocrisy hadn't taken root. It's a staggering thought. There's a fascinating prophecy about Abraham. God curses those who curse his descendants. If we look at the last millennium, we see a kind of moral rot in the very societies that built their empires on oppression. Nations that relied on injustice, whether in colonial Europe or America, have been plagued by constant internal conflict, wars, and social instability. It's as if the curse rebounded on the oppressor. Meanwhile, the people who were trampled upon for 1,000 years, black and African people, have shown incredible resilience. Think about it. The civil rights movement and the independence movements across Africa were more aligned with the true spirit of Christian and Islamic justice than the empires that oppressed them. They are the meek who are rising. For centuries, the Abrahamic blessing was used like a locked door to exclude Africans from the story of human progress. But the long game is finally playing out. By rediscovering the incredible history of places like Timbuktu and foundational laws like the Karuk and Fuga, we are restoring a great name that was never lost, only hidden. The old myth was that African history was just a void of barbarism waiting for so-called civilization. But the truth is, Africa was often the source of the very civilization that later turned to colonize it. The true prophecy, that in Abraham's seed, all families of the earth shall be blessed, is finally being understood in its global context. It was never a blessing for just one race or one empire. It was a blueprint for resilience. Today, those who were marginalized for so long are leading the global conversation on justice and human rights. The African diaspora is offering the world a well of wisdom forged in the fire of persecution. The curse of historical distortion is finally breaking. The meek are not inheriting the earth with a sword, but by outlasting the lie. The truth of the Mali Empire isn't just black history. It's the missing piece of human history that makes the Abrahamic prophecy whole. Always do your own research. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and have a blessed day.